Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Brain Week. Thank you for joining us. Today marks the beginning of Brain Awareness Week, which is an international campaign to foster enthusiasm and support for brain science. Brain Week Rhode Island is an organization that celebrates this week by coordinating a range of events within our own state. For the past 6 years, we have brought you dozens of events that are fun and engaging for a variety of people of different ages and from different backgrounds. Our mission is to find creative ways of getting people to learn about the human brain, both from a science perspective and from a health perspective. We also aim to inspire the next generation of brain scientists right here in our state. Now, last year, our 5-year anniversary celebrations were cut short due to COVID, but with the help of all of you, our sponsors, partners, volunteers, and followers, we have put together a pretty exciting lineup of events. We would especially like to thank our presenting sponsor this year, our Neuron Level sponsor, which is the Violence and Injury Prevention Program at the Rhode Island Department of Health. We would also like to thank our GLIA level sponsors, who this year are the George and Anne Ryan Center for Neuroscience at the University of Rhode Island, and Care New England, and on behalf of Butler Hospital. We would also like to thank our many sponsors and donors who are listed on our website. This year, we celebrate our 6th anniversary with a week of fun events that, trust me, are specifically designed to combat Zoom fatigue. So the Brain Talk series, which you're tuned into today, will run again tomorrow and Wednesday with different guests and topics. So we do encourage you to join us back. On Thursday, we will treat you to some brain-inspired theater. And on Friday, we will end with a panel discussion on how mindfulness practices can be useful in and out of the clinic. And finally, we have an ongoing program for K through 12 students called Brady Adventures. You can find more information about all of these on our website at www.brainweekri.org. So without further ado, I will pass you on to our host for the series, Dr. Pablo Rodriguez.
Thank you, Victoria, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Brain Talk, a lunchtime series. Our show today will blend science and storytelling on a range of topics that relate to brain health and wellness. My name is Pablo Rodriguez. I am an associate professor emeritus at the Warren Alpert Medical School. I will be your host today, along with Dr. Victoria Heimer-McGinn, who is the founder and chair of Brain Week Rhode Island, an assistant professor of neuroscience in the Department of Psychology at Roger Williams University. Today, we will discuss sleep, migraines, and memory. It's perfect timing because this weekend someone decided to change the clock, and many of us have lost sleep, forgot to show up on time, and that was quite a headache. This will be the format for today's presentation. Each guest will be with us for 20 minutes, during which time you are invited to submit questions through the Q&A function. You have the option to remain anonymous, and we will pre-screen questions before they are visible to other attendees. Myself and Dr. Heimer-McGinn will bring your questions to the guests in an interview style. The chat function is disabled, so that is to avoid confusion. Please note that as an audience member, you have been automatically muted and will not be visible at any time during the event. The attendee list is also made private. The presentations are going to be very quick, so send us your questions right away. So let's get started. Our first guest today is Dr. Mari Cascadon, PhD. She is an authority on adolescent sleep and circadian rhythms. Dr. Cascadon serves as director of the Chronobiology and Sleep Research Laboratory at Bradley Hospital and is a professor of psychiatry and human behavior at the Alpert Medical School. She's a distinguished alumni and honorary degree holder of Gettysburg College and holds a doctorate in neuro and biobehavioral sciences from Stanford University, with a specialty in sleep research. Dr. Cascadon has received awards from several national organizations recognizing her scientific, educational, and public policy contributions. Her talk will discuss sleep of children and teens in the context of a research that examines associations between brain systems that regulate sleep-wake behavior, that is, the circadian timing system and the sleep homeostat. Her findings have raised public health regarding public health issues regarding the consequences of insufficient sleep for adolescents, as well as concerns about early starting times of schools. Her work has affected education policy, prompting the American Academy of Pediatrics and others to promote later school timing for adolescents and many school districts to delay their start times. Welcome, Dr. Cascada. I don't want to put you on the spot, but we need you to convince the administration to get rid of this daylight savings thing because it really affects me. I know it affects many of us. So I know you have a small presentation for us about sleep, and then we'll have some questions from the audience. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I should say that this is also Sleep Awareness Week in addition to Brain Week, because guess what? We all had to turn our clocks an hour forward. So I'll say good morning for those of you who are still thinking it's 11:07 and not 12:07. I know we still have some of those ancient clocks that you have to set by hand, and we're doing that. I actually set my cuckoo clock this morning as well. At any rate, so I thought I would talk to you all today about adolescent sleep and this issue of adolescent sleep and schools and insufficient sleep. And again, as introduced, there are a couple of brain-based systems that are involved in helping to regulate sleep. Of course, we do many behaviors that change our sleep and often make it less good, shall we say. But one of our seminal findings has to do with clocks, the biological clock in adolescence. So this cartoon just shows that, an adolescent whose brain clock, and the brain clock doesn't really look like this. It's a paired nucleus deep within the brain. It's sort of, if you had a geographic center of the brain, that's where your master clock lives. And, you can see, well, there's this inappropriate connection between the school system's clocks and the adolescent's brain clock. And so we found a number of years ago that one of the things that changes during adolescent development is the timing of this clock and the way that your phase position gets a little later as you pass through puberty. And with that in mind, it's not just your eating and your activity and so forth that change. And it's not just, that your bedtime gets later, but your time of waking up gets later, your natural innate time. And so that's a challenge that really gets in the way for adolescents getting enough sleep when they have to be in school so early. In fact, one of my colleagues who has an early teenage son on Thursday said to me, all of a sudden, he's no longer happy to go to bed or happy to get up in the morning. And he's there, it's like a light switch was turned on. So this is, it's not every teen, but for a lot of families, parents will see this as a sea change that happens very abruptly in their youngsters. And so the other side of this that was mentioned is, so we have our clock, but we also have the brain systems that regulate how much sleep we need and how sleep pressure accumulates while we're awake and then gets dispelled or recovers when we're asleep. Our research has also shown that process itself changes not in how fast recovery occurs. So we think, the amount of sleep that's necessary isn't really changing, but how fast sleep pressure builds up. So this consequences, it's actually easier for the adolescents to stay awake longer, but they still need the same amount of sleep. So and then of course, not our biology, but also the brain is impacted by all of these other things that go on, and including screen time and social interactions that teens will prefer to do at night and keep them from sleeping. And so in combination, sleep kind of gets squeezed out of their lives when they have to be in school early. So that's a real challenge for teens and families to negotiate. And finally, you know, the state of California, before COVID hit, had passed a legislation to have schools not start before 8:30 a.m. for both middle school and high school. So that's all, you know, the monkey wrench has been COVID and remote learning and virtual platforms. And we have a little project, we're working with a team to see the effects of those different kinds of school scheduling on adolescent sleep. It's an interesting time to be involved in this field. And I know Rhode Island teenagers today, tomorrow, this week, those who are going back to school, real school, and have to be there early. And it's like, but wait, we turned our clocks ahead, and it's a huge challenge, especially this week. So the adjustment will take a while. And I think everybody, you know, knows that. So I'll stop there and field any questions that may come in.
Thank you, Dr. Cascadon. I have a question regarding sleep and students. Are you aware of any real world examples of school performance being changed or improved by changing the start time?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there are quite a few, actually. But, you know, what's interesting is that it's so hard to get a handle on the academic performance of teenagers, because every school and even every year will have different approaches. But one of my favorite studies happened in England, where they did a sort of ABA kind of study where they had the baseline information, and then they delayed the school start time for 1 year, and then they changed it back. And their outcome measure was the National Testing Service. So their control group was the entire nation of teens. And they indeed saw that those scores on the nationwide testing were much higher, i.e. better, in the time when school start time was delayed than before or after. So, and in comparison to the students who didn't have that change occur. So, you know, and there are other things people have looked at. One of what I feel, you know, some people are there, well, so what? They have to learn and grow up and, you know, adjust like we all do. But there's pretty much evidence now that changing the school start time to a later time also diminishes the number of automobile crashes with teen drivers. And some of those crashes have lasting impact on the kids, and some are fatal. So there are kind of big issues that can emerge. And just one final thing, I'm not good at sound bites, so but one final thing is what I think is kind of one of the most important findings was in an educational economics journal. And it turns out the kids who benefited most in terms of their grades and their performance in school were the kids who came from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. And so we forget sometimes, you know, when we live in a lovely place like Rhode Island, that, you know, there are challenges that many families have and that teens have. So a teenager whose both parents or single parents are working 1 or 2 jobs and they miss the school bus because they overslept, that's it. They miss the day. Whereas, you know, a teen from a more affluent family, you know, oh, you woke up late. Well, I'll drive you to school today. the mom says. And so they don't miss that entire day. So there really are many, we don't think about some of these sort of systemic challenges that are in our society.
And it's really interesting, the fact that our school schedule really responds to a different time. An agricultural time, not the time that we live in today, and other countries are doing it very differently.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some recent science coming out of some Latin American countries where, it was interesting. One of the papers, I think it was from Ecuador, talked about the teens and the way their families live, where they actually have a meal late in the evening for the family, the family gathers. And so that makes, that's a different kind of social challenge on the kids' sleep. And again, they benefit if they're on the group that's going to school later. And it's so interesting, and all of the components and nuances and the way we organize our lives. And as you say, now that we're on daylight saving time, midnight, that word is no longer accurate, because the middle of darkness on Saturday was midnight, but tonight is not midnight. It's 1 a.m. So it's, we no longer really live by the geophysical Earth and planetary orbits and so forth. But yeah.
And our brains suffer as a result. Victoria, we have any questions from the audience?
We do. We have one question that says, how does your clock change after high school or college?
It's interesting. There's some lovely work from a European colleague who actually wrote a paper that he called The Biological Signal for the End of Adolescence. And so his data, and this is cross-sectional data from thousands of people, giving their sleep schedules. And what he found was that during adolescence, this phase goes later and later and later, but then there's a tipping point, around age 20, early 20s, where it starts going earlier and earlier. So, behavior and biology aren't always joined at the hip, but I think it's a pretty good view of what may be going on as kids get a little older and pass into other phases of life. And not to mention us old folks, where that curve keeps getting a little earlier and earlier, which doesn't make daylight saving time transition any easier.
And there seems to be, is there a reduced need for sleep later in life? Or is that just sort of a behavioral thing that is not in line with biology?
That's a very complex issue, and it's still fraught with a little bit of, challenges in the field and a little disagreement. But it does appear that the need for sleep does decline in older age. And we don't know why, we don't know how that is, but we do know, one of the things to emphasize, which I think is particularly important for sleep and aging, is that we still need our sleep, and we need to get the sleep we need, because one of the important newly discovered functions of sleep, if you will, is that it engages a system that clears toxins from the central nervous system. So it's like the cleanup crew for our brains. And there's some evidence that the kinds of things it's cleaning out are the kinds of things that are involved in these sort of late age dementias and problems that occur. And so, you ignore your good sleep at your peril.
Right. So we have a couple of questions coming in now. One question says, is there research on how depression and anxiety impact adolescent sleep and their ability to wake up early in the morning for school?
That's a great question. And, we always think there's a two-way street between those mental health issues and sleep, and that improved sleep will improve mental health, issues, and poor mental health will make sleep worse. And so there is evidence that what was suggested that, implied was that anxiety and depression, especially when very serious, will challenge teens even further to get up in the morning. But I caution to say that, the street runs the other direction as well. And if we don't, it's another thing we know, if we're not paying attention, especially for teens getting adequate sleep, they will show greater signs of anxiety and depression. And you worry about when that flips into sort of impulsive behavior that can lead to suicide.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question here is, can you train your mind to need less sleep? Example, 6 hours per night versus 8 to 9. And I can see the applications of this if you had a job that required you maybe to reduce your need for sleep.
The short answer is no.
That's what I thought.
There is a kind of an allostatic process that can go on and then does show up, but that may be in the regulation of sleep, so in those core functions, but in the outputs and in our performance and in our cognitive capacities, no. And, the other thing that comes up a lot is, well, what if I, still get 8 hours or even fewer, but sleep in 2-hour chunks around the clock? Let me just say no.
It's not like a bank account.
No, it is in some ways. You don't want to overdraw for a long time. And, and there's also the binging that a lot of people will do, binge sleeping on the weekends. And that just makes your sleep irregular. And there's plenty of evidence now for metabolic consequences of sleep irregularity, as well as too little sleep, irregular sleep, poorly timed sleep. Shift workers, I feel so bad for them because some of them are, again, there's a sort of societal bias that the people working shifts are more often the people who are at the lower ends of society, and they have no way out. It's just, if they want a job, this is the job that's available. And that's really a challenge. And this 24/7 society we live in really has a number of these hidden challenges that we don't always think about.
Yeah.
It's also tough for us obstetrician gynecologists.
There you go. Oh, man.
Well, hopefully the pandemic will help shed some light on this issue. We have learned that we can survive working in a less, active world. So hopefully that will be one of the ramifications. Another question here is, what is the effect, if any, of interrupting sleep at night or changing from a recliner to a bed, going to the bathroom, etc.?
I don't know. What we know is interruptions happen and things go on. The worst case scenario, speaking of our OBGYN, is the next step which is the first step for parenting with a newborn. And sleep is incredibly disrupted for parents of newborns. That just is remarkable what happens to sleep. And again, there are downside consequences. But, switching from your recliner to your bed probably doesn't cause much harm. You want to, there's data that light maybe is important as anything, lights at night. But, what that tells me, though, is that individual hasn't really planned sleep. They just fell asleep and not in their bed, and now they have to get up and actually trundle off to their bed. So it's far better to have a plan for sleep and not just wait until it overtakes you.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, there are a couple of questions about screen time. And if you could just say a couple of words about what your opinions on screen time are before bedtime.
Sure, stop it. That's a couple of words. There's a lot of myth out there. Oh, as long as it's not blue light, it's no problem. Wrong. The parts of your retina that are specifically for blue light and do connect to this clock in the center of your brain also bring information from the other parts of your retina that are pulling in other wavelengths of light, and so it gets integrated. So it doesn't help just to wear your blue blockers or put the blue screen blockers on. It helps some, but it's not the cure. So the later you have it, if you could just put those things away, turn them off.
But you can still read a book, right? Reading a book is not bad.
In the dark. So if you're doing it with Braille,
that's right.
That could work. I remember when I was a teen, I would read. I would read and read. I would stay up late reading. That was before, yes, we had our electronic devices. But it's this process that makes it easier to stay awake later. And then you get into the book or whatever it is that you're into. Maybe nowadays it's the video game that you're playing. And then, it just sort of eats up your time and your sleep time.
I have a question that I know is from a middle schooler that doesn't have school today that says, how come the early school time is not a problem for elementary school students?
Well, the thing is that those changes that happen to the brain systems that push sleep later because of the brain change, they happen in adolescence. And so most younger kids are protected for early, not super early. I'm not offering recommendations that even the youngest kids should go to school super early. I think that's a mistake, especially in the 21st century, where it really is hard for families to organize things well. But little kids, they pop up in the morning with a song in their heart and a smile on their lips, and hit adolescence, and that just stops happening. Mm-hmm. And the younger kids, they can't fight off sleep in the evening because that pressure to sleep builds up at a much higher rate, much faster rate. So, the biology is different, I guess, is the main response to that theory.
Mm-hmm. I have one interesting question that has to do with migraines. Is there any link between lack of sleep and migraines?
I don't know the biological link, but there certainly is a link that many people report. If they, when they lose sleep, they're more likely to have a migraine. And if they can fall asleep during the migraine, it actually will, get better a little faster than if they just keep doing what they're doing. So there's a link, but I don't think the real biology or neurophysiology of that link is clear.
Well, our next speaker is going to be an expert on migraines because she suffers from them. So we'll be able to ask her as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of questions, and Pablo, you stop me because you're the boss here. But there's one interesting question about the COVID vaccine and whether there has been any evidence of the COVID vaccine impacting amount and or nature of dream activity.
Oh, I haven't seen any of that evidence.
Neither have
I've certainly heard from friends that the second dose knocks them for a loop. And for that reason, because they get like acute flu symptoms, it interferes with their sleep. But I hadn't heard that people are dreaming more when they get the vaccine. That's cool. I'll have to look into that.
Well,
yeah, right.
I'll look into it as well. Thank you, Dr. Cascadon. This was really very, very interesting. And you definitely did not put us to sleep this afternoon. So,
all right. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next year. Our next guest today is Alexis Elizabeth. She is a human living with migraine disease, a patient advocate, and a comedian. After decades void of proper diagnosis, her goal is to assist the migraine community at large, the community of neurological disorders and invisible diseases alike, by lending a voice to raise awareness. Alexis is one of our storytellers and will share her journey as a person living with migraines. Welcome, Alexis. I can't wait to hear your story because as a gynecologist, I am a witness to the struggles that women have trying to convince doctors that the headache that they're having is not just your period or your birth control pill, and that forget about it when you're talking about using narcotics and other medications that sometimes make the situation worse. So I can't wait to hear your story. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and that was an awesome intro. Thank you. So yes, my storytelling. I'll start off. My brain is stuck like in a cartoon. I see stars in my head so different, and yet lost just the same. That these exaggerated silver flecks that I once laughed at on Saturday mornings live in my head too. My spinning in circles had a name. One day I woke up from what I thought was a dream, feeling like I was swimming in my bed, but I didn't have a water bed. So I climbed out of bed onto the cold floor, hoping to have some relief. And it didn't work. I was still swimming. In fact, it made it much worse. When I finally stopped swimming, I tried to call my sister to explain, and I felt so ill that it felt like a crazy dream, and I had no idea what this was, this dizzying, nauseating effect that I had come over me. And if this was reality, I knew I must be awake when she didn't laugh, and I thought to myself, I have to see this doctor. And my doctor had actually prescribed for me to view a YouTube video to align the crystals in my ear. And I knew that medicine and technology had traveled so far, but I thought, had it traveled to YouTube? How did I end up casted in one of Alfred Hitchcock's movies? I really thought Vertigo was just a movie. And I always laugh at myself. I anticipate a funnier outcome than the last every visit from the doctor's office to the emergency room. And I always find comfort because nothing is ever terribly wrong. And it was kind of like the one time when I saw a primary care doctor and was misdiagnosed. Something like him telling me I had ringworm, only to find out from the ER doc I had pityriasis. And I remember returning to my doctor, and it suddenly became my job to manage his very delicate ego and explain to him how they came up with a proper diagnosis. Void of any pay and any gratitude to explain, that became my new responsibility at every doctor's appointment. And this is the same doctor that years prior told me I had PNES, the pseudo non-epileptic seizures, after being monitored in a hospital for more than a month. And I remember thinking, is he saying pines? Like, is this a Christmas tree illness? I didn't know what any of that meant. And so the internet wasn't what it is today. I'm sure a lot of people watching this can relate. It depends on your age range. The internet didn't have the kind of answers that it had today, but I thought there has to be a better way to find someone that would listen. But instead, this doctor was only good at diagnosing my sinus infections, but he wasn't very great at much else. And so this cycle would continue of not being believed for many years, turning into decades. And I recall trying to explain how the sunlight was so bright and it was just too bright across the snow. And the answer for that was, let's prescribe her Provigil, make sure she stays awake. No one looked at any of these symptoms. And so when I would fall in a store display or I would stumble just trying to walk, no one had an answer for that. And my eye, I'm always bouncing. You probably, for those of you watching, can see now that my eyes are always bouncing around, being careful never to absorb too much light. And it goes beyond that. When I'm looking in the refrigerator and find a box of tea, that's a strong reminder that that's my brain fog that comes from having migraine. And so I found that at work, I wanted to shoot the copy machine and kill the facts. And every staple that my coworker would staple the papers, or every hole punch, it was just this question of, why are these sounds so blaring? So since I've always been one of those, nothing's really wrong with you, you're fine, I found so much comfort in that I didn't know how to shift to take my diagnosis or my story more serious. Because my doctor, after all, insisted, because there was no father in the home, that was to be the answer. And so with every illness, I would find I wasn't taken serious. And with migraine, it's so debilitating. It's really becomes agitating to be ignored. And I would think of 7,000 errands that I would love to run. But migraine is rude. Migraine is a liar. Migraine lets you think you can get dressed up and meet your friends for lunch, or it makes you think once you wake up, maybe you'll be able to walk to the front door. But migraine's also nosy. It goes everywhere that you go, and it's just waiting for an opportunity to implode. And sometimes I think migraine's a bully, that it's just waiting to show up, to show out. It's waiting for you to take a bite of food, to smack it out of your hands, and it's so dramatic. And so I admire migraine's tenacity and how ready it is all the time just to disrupt my plans. My favorite is when I think I sound smart and migraine just decides to jumble my words. And so now I sound so incredibly clueless. Talking about simple tasks, it'll sound something like, I need to hurry up and brush my eyes so I can comb my ear. And only I understand that that's when transient aphasia has kicked in, because maybe someone's facial expression, or maybe someone laughs, or better yet, a relative or a close friend will try to finish my sentence because migraine has taken my words. Or I'll say something like, I'm going to get my shoes out of the oven so I can eat my water. And I mean, how could you talk like that and not laugh? Do I get frustrated? Yes. I am coherent during these, what people call episodes of these hemiplegic migraine attacks. And I can hear everyone around me busying themselves to find a way to help me. And yet, for some reason, I still have doctors that will yell in my face, thinking by elevating their voice, I'll somehow be able to hear them better. But I can hear them, and most times I can see them. But migraine takes my motor skills away. And I've even gotten to the point where I memorize my nurses by their smell, because sometimes with the Baszler migraine with brainstem aura, it takes away my vision. And sometimes there's tunnel vision. Sometimes I'm just aggravated because my body won't do what it wants to do, what I think it should do. And so there's this challenge of canceling plans and canceling what seems to be the life that I thought I would have, but it's because of migraine. But I'm blessed with patience now. I can find the tiniest gold fleck in a piece of tile work, and I'm learning it's other people that are impatient. I have so much more in common with relatives and friends who live with dementia and who have survived stroke. And you could probably hear the tears in my voice because it's not accepted. Someone put it on the shelf and gave it a stigma. So they would rather trust a broken arm, but they don't trust my brain. And that's migraine. And that's really all I had planned today. I did not plan to tear up. So I'm very sorry.
Neither did we. And
I couldn't speak because I was choked up too.
I'm in the same position. I mean, it is really remarkable the way you can, tell your story and make us smile, laugh, and cry at the same time. Because it to me, it shows that you have developed an adaptive response to this. You haven't spoken about drugs. You haven't spoken about medication. You haven't spoken about treatment. All you have spoken is, I have recognized that I have something that I need to deal with, and somehow you have been able, by virtue of your own tenacity, to conquer it, or to at least manage it in most of the time.
I would say it's the part of my brain that I managed to stay hopeful, to know that my life has meaning, because we have not found a medication that works. And a lot of people, if anyone's watching who lives with migraine with aura, there are certain classifications of medications that are not safe, like the good old triptans that came out many decades ago. We don't know some of the effects of a lot of even the newer drugs. So we take them because we're excited for a chance at having a normal day. But to be honest, we had no idea that those medications, their role was just to minimize the headache pain from migraine. I was one of those people that thought, I'm going to take one of these new meds and it's going to take away my aura, and I'll, have all these great things happen. But I will tell you, 3 years ago, I was using a walker and transitioned to a cane, and it was all from migraine. So it is truly debilitating.
Victoria, we have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, and some of them are questions I had as well. So, first of all, how early do you remember having migraines? And when were you finally diagnosed correctly? Have you been diagnosed correctly?
Finally, I have. So I want to say probably around the age 6 or 7, like now looking back, right? When you start looking at what these symptoms are, as far as like the vision loss or the loss of the motor skills, the symmetry in your face that you see like with people that have survived stroke, where it looks like the one side just kind of shifts a little bit. Mm-hmm. I will say I wasn't diagnosed. It took me about 30 years. I was in my 30s, so I'm still in my 30s, before someone named it hemiplegic migraine, and someone said, hey, it's actually the basilar migraine, the migraine with brainstem aura as well. But all the other years I went from dropping out of multiple colleges because I couldn't make up coursework from being in the hospital. But if it had a name, if I had been believed, then maybe there's a form we could have filled out, and I didn't have to just keep dropping out thinking I couldn't finish a task.
Absolutely. Pablo, I wonder from a medical perspective, how often are migraines misdiagnosed? Oh, you're on mute.
They do all the time, because what happens is that most of the time the symptoms are presenting just as headache. We sometimes put the onus on the patient to tell us everything that they're feeling, but what happens is that people don't relate having a headache to other somatic symptoms, to not being able to walk, to not being able to speak. So the doctors just basically follow, what you heard from the patient. It's a headache. Oh, let me give you a prescription for headache medication, or for, oh yeah, you may have migraine. Do you have any aura? I mean, we don't do a complete analysis of all the potential symptoms that migraine shows until we already have tried stuff, And by then, many of the patients just like become very frustrated, become very, very frustrated.
Absolutely. One person says here they suffer from chronic migraines and have been diagnosed, and they were just wondering from a sort of medical perspective, what is the evidence that treatment will actually help make symptoms better? And so, Pablo, I think maybe that question is more for you. Alexis is like, I don't know.
I'm not the doctor. I can tell you what I think, but it's not,
Tell us what you think. You're the guest.
Well, so I'll be honest. I know I do advocacy work and try to speak to people that are living with migraine. And the truth is there's no cure for migraine. And so any medication that's prescribed is to help manage those symptoms. There is information out there to support, for any disease really, that the longer that you go undiagnosed, so now you're in that chronic, intractable every day, that is going to be a lot harder to come out of that and kind of get back to your normalcy. And so I think having the conversation with your provider, seeing a migraine headache specialist, not just a neurologist, but someone with the extra training, someone that wants to see you and not just get stuck with you. Because one of the things that you want to understand is what was your baseline? What is your expectation of what you hope to do? And what is the expectation of what this medication that they prescribe? What's the expectation of what it's supposed to do? I think that's the two big components.
And also the fact that, you end up trying so many different medications, and mixing drugs that sometimes, the side effects of the medication, are causing other problems. So it becomes really, really confusing for both the patient and the doctor.
Absolutely. There's one, it's more a comment here, but it says migraine, vertigo, and being dizzy daily means evaluating in the moment. Humor is helpful. So it's more of a comment, but I wonder, you are a comedian. How often do you use, bits from your own life that you kind of just make fun of yourself? Does that feature in your comedy?
It does, but funny enough, no one knew that I had migraine to this extent, and they didn't realize some of the routines I had to do to be okay to be on stage, because I didn't, at the time when I first started comedy, I wasn't diagnosed. And B, I didn't want anybody to freak out thinking I was going to come plummeting like from the stage into the audience. So for me, I was always the one where I would be sitting in a green room and they're like, come on, come out and watch the other comedians. And I didn't know how to say, I had to try to really limit how much time I saw the spotlight and how much time I heard the laughter. So there's a different place in my brain I had to travel to just make it through those minutes. But I will say the humor is the best. I take mental snapshots of my normal hours so that after a hemiplegic migraine, when I'm face down on the floor, can't move, can't talk, but I'm coming to, that I have this happy place to return to. And so I can see me walking across the street or see me doing an activity that I'm not able to do that day or that week, but I can smile and say, wow, I had a good day. It might have been a couple days ago, but I had a good day.
Yeah.
I see a question there for a gynecologist, huh?
Yeah, I'll ask you, Dr. Rodriguez, what is the correlation between migraines, menses, and birth control, and how can it be helped?
Well, there's a lot of things in that question. So people using birth control pills can develop headaches as a side effect of the hormones that are in the birth control pills. But what's important is if anybody develops migraines with aura, the feeling that you're going to get the headache, the symptoms that predate the headache, that is very, very risky. Those patients should not be on birth control pills, because those are the patients that are going to develop a potential stroke, a potential cardiovascular event. And premenstrual syndrome sometimes involves, unfortunately, headaches, but they're not in the same character as migraines, and typically go away after the period.
There's another question. And I should say that although Pablo Rodriguez is a doctor, you shouldn't get any medical advice from anything we say here. But there is one comment that says that they used to get auras in their teens. In their 40s, they had a seizure and had to take anti-seizure medication, but now the auras are gone. Is this something that you have heard before? You're muted, Pablo.
I have not. I have not heard that before. So I don't know if Alexis has heard about it.
Well, I guess what I would say is one thing that I have heard about is auras changing, right? And so like I'm a person that typically gets visual aura, which means that they'll still reflect something, for me, sometimes I see spots. But people forget that aura can also be that sensory. Are you getting that numbness and tingling? So I don't know if the person asking the question is aware of migraine disease is a spectrum disease. That's first. And so within that, you have to understand that the aura is also follows the spectrum. There's no like, you might see colors and different like waves there's just different things that you might see or can feel.
I had a patient that had a smell, but actually she smelled something every time before the headache.
Yes, some people smell like rancid, like garbage. I smell things that are burning. So I have like this weird thing before I go to sleep, or if I leave the house, I'll be like, did everybody make sure the stove is off? I don't know. Like it's so wild. But if you don't, there's like 4 stages in your migraine before you get to the postdrome, before you get to the end. And that's the other confusing thing. If you're like, I'm chronic daily intractable status migrainosis. So that means like I haven't gone one day without a migraine in over 3 years. And so it's hard for me to know the phases until the aura comes, because we're always cycling through to the next.
Is there anything, any kind of food, any kind of tea, any kind of thing that either triggers your headaches or that help the headache once you have it?
So for me, everyone who has a migraine has probably heard the saying that, migraine loves routine. So sticking to the routine, if you haven't, like you guys were saying actually before in the first chat, the sleep schedule, sticking to the things that you can, because insomnia can definitely weigh in. Foods, for me, it was learning about the effect of histamine, because it's one thing that you can't avoid. Since it's in the environment, it's in your food, it's everywhere, it's in your beauty product, it's in SPF, you name it. So that whole bucket theory of being very conscious of how much of the histamine, that I can avoid, maybe something like an avocado or a banana, I won't have, because I know I've had histamine overload in a different area, but there's nothing I found that technically like quote unquote triggers it, because I realize migraine disease is a true disease. So anything else can exacerbate it. I don't really find anything that actually triggers it.
Interesting. And I will say, going back to the auras and the seizures, auras are also a precursor to seizures. So there is overlap there, and both are considered diseases that, at the neuroscientific level, it's a circuit disorder, in terms of the electrical activity of the population of cells. So they can be quite similar. So it is possible that they were also misdiagnosed, and that it's actually the same presentation, just differently later in life.
Thanks for bringing that point up. That's actually one of my first few neurologists. I was on seizure medication because he said it's too much brain activity to call it normal, but not quite enough to call it a seizure. And it was my nephew later in life who has epilepsy, who saw one of my hemiplegic migraine attacks and said, "Auntie, this looks like me when I have migraine." And it really kept pushing me to find a doctor to help me. Oh, I'm sorry. See, that's the brain fog. My mom's in the background like, no, seizure. He has seizures. I'm like, yeah. It was him seeing me have a hemiplegic migraine attack, saying like, you look like me when I have seizure. But, and so that kind of pushed me, like people care and they want me to get answers, even if the doctors didn't have the answer yet. So thanks for bringing up that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Vado, there's a question about pregnancy and migraine symptoms changing before and after pregnancy. I wonder if that's something that you've seen in the clinic.
I've seen that. I've seen like the person who's asking the question saying that she used to have migraines before pregnancy, and once she had a baby, the symptoms went away. Those could be related more to hormonal changes that happen, during the pregnancy, that changes the receptors for the hormones that can trigger the headache in that case. So, but yes, that is something that can happen, and you're a lucky person that happened, because you traded one headache for another. Just, just bringing up children.
So we have time for one more. This is more of a comment, but I think it's an important one to make, and to thank you, Alexis. She says, I have a friend who's been suffering from a migraine. Thank you so very much for speaking out on your experience and feelings. It is very helpful. So I think, Alexis, absolutely, migraines are a silent disorder, not only for employers, but also for people who are our friends. Sometimes our friends cancel on us and we think that they're making up an excuse because they have a headache. And I think it's just very enlightening for all of us to understand what people with migraines are going through, that it's not an excuse, and that if we trust our friends and our employees, we should really, definitely give credence to what they're saying. So thank
Victoria,
you.
and some people were asking if this presentation is going to be available afterwards, if they want to refer to other people to come and watch.
Yes, absolutely. So right now we're actually streaming live on Facebook. And so if you go to our page on Facebook, whether or not you have a Facebook account, you will be able to see this video. We will likely put it on our YouTube channel as well, Brain Week RI. So you will be able to find it there within the week.
Fantastic. Well, we could be here for a long time. So I wanted to say thanks to Alexis for her presentation, and good luck with your journey, because it's obviously a long journey and a difficult one, but one that you seem to be really managing very well. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate being included in this. So I'm excited to hear what's up next. Thanks so much.
Sure. Our next guest is Dr. Athene Lee, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at the Brown University Alpert Medical School. She's also a clinical neuropsychologist at the Butler Hospital Memory and Aging Program, and the director of the Butler Alzheimer's Prevention Registry. Dr. Lee is a site principal investigator for the trial-ready cohort for preclinical prodromal Alzheimer's disease. That's when you are looking at people that are developing some kind of symptoms that could, or findings that could show Alzheimer's disease in the future. She's a site neuropsychologist for the U.S. study to protect brain health through lifetime intervention to reduce risk, and sub-investigator for a number of other Alzheimer's disease clinical trials. Dr. Lee received her doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Suffolk University and completed her residency and fellowship in neuropsychology at Brown University Alpert Medical School. She is dedicated to promoting early identification and intervention for cognitive decline and to enhance diverse representation in Alzheimer's disease and related dementia research. Her research is focused on risk prevention algorithm for preclinical Alzheimer's, disclosure of genetic and biomarker risk for Alzheimer's, and cultural influence on subjective cognitive decline. Something that I am extremely interested because after turning 65, it looks like the brain is not working as good as it used to, and I keep losing my glasses by keeping them on top of my head. So
forgetting to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for joining us today.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. I'm really honored to be here. So we will be talking about memory, and specifically because of my research interest, and because Pablo, you're interested in it, we're talking about how aging is affecting memory. I will begin by talking a bit about what memory is. I think a lot of people when they think about memory, they will think of it as one thing. You either have your memory or you lose your memory. But actually, memory is a more complex concept than what we know. And to give you some idea about, what memory is, I can tell you that memory actually can be split down into three main components. In order for us to form memory, first of all, we need to go through the learning phase, or what we call memory encoding, right? So we need to listen to the piece of new information that we want to remember, or we read it, if it is presented to you visually, and try to learn it and encode it into your brain. So that's stage one. Stage two is storage, memory storage. So once you learn the piece of information, you want to keep it in your brain and in your mind so that later on when you need it, you can pull it out and use it. So if you think of your brain as a computer, it's like storing a piece of new information into the hard drive. And you will keep it for a period of time until you need to use it. So that's memory storage. That's the second phase. And the last phase, the stage three, is memory retrieval. So that's when you actually need that piece of information. You will search for your hard drive, you search for your brain library, and look for the right piece of information that you need to use it and pull it out. So that's the third stage: encoding, storage, and retrieval. And our memory can change throughout life in those three stages. So Pablo, when you say that you put your glasses somewhere and you forgot where you put it, that's probably a retrieval problem. You know where it is, you put it down, but you just at the moment you didn't pull out the location exactly right away. But usually, probably later on you will figure it out. And for some people, if they listen to, someone tell you a phone number and you listen to it and you couldn't remember it later on, it's probably not a problem of storage or retrieval, but it's encoding. You only listen it once, and a phone number have 9 digits. It's pretty, random string of number. If you hear it only once, maybe you fail to encode it. And those are actually pretty normal things that you might experience throughout life, and that may be normal and nothing to worry about. It become more concerning when the memory problem that occur is more consistent with what we see in patients who have dementia. So, for example, Alzheimer's disease is one of the kind of dementia that is most common as people get older. And for those patients, their memory problems is actually in the middle phase, storage. So they learn the information, no problem. They can repeat it to themselves and then they remember it. But their storage is not working well. So when the information comes in, it actually leaks out. It did not stay. So when it comes to time when you want to retrieve that piece of information, no matter how much more time you gave to them, they couldn't find it because it's not there anymore. It's lost. So that's a difference between pathological change in memory versus memory change that occur with aging. Memory changes that occur with aging is more associated with encoding and retrieval. So let's say if I ask you to remember 3 words now. So try to remember that. Lemon, tiger, jacket. Okay, so you listen to it, you try to remember it. If you want to enhance your encoding, you will repeat it to yourself, right? You will say lemon, tiger, jacket, and repeat it a few times, and then you will remember it. Or better still is you're going to write it down somewhere, and so when you need it, you can pull it out. So that kind of encoding period, as we get older, starting in our 30s, 40s, you will find that, it's harder for us to learn things. We really need to write down. We really need to rely on our notes, versus kids who are in their, 10 years old teens, or it may be easier for them to listen to it once and remember it. So that's actually pretty normal when you find yourself more reliant on notes. And then when you need to retrieve it, so let's say I asked you to, okay, so what were those 3 words? I asked you to remember. You may start to remember, okay, so lemon is one of them, and I don't remember the next 2. But if I give you a cue or a hint, you may then able to retrieve it. So I can say, one of the word was actually an animal. And you will say, right, there's a tiger in there. And then one last word is a piece of clothing. It's either jacket or pants. And you go, oh, right, it's jacket. Now I remember. So that is also pretty normal. As we get older, we may need more reminders and hint for us to pull out information from our brain's memory storage. So again, if you think of yourself as a computer, you over time, when you accumulate more information, as we get older, into our 30s and 40s, we learn much more information and knowledge. So our hard drive is actually growing bigger and bigger. And when you get to your 60s, 70s, you have lived like 60 years, 70 years. You have a lot of major events in your life and things that happened in your life that you want to remember and is in your memory. So when it comes time to retrieve, it may be, take you a little bit longer to search throughout your hard drive to locate that exact piece of information that you need. And a cue or a hint may be helpful for you to go to the right spot and pick out that relevant piece of information. And it's different if the person is having dementia, because if you give them the hint, they couldn't locate that piece of information because it's not in the storage anymore. So that's kind of a brief overview about how memory changes as we get older and what is different between normal aging and people who are suffering from dementia. And right now, the kind of research that I'm looking at is pushing for looking at earliest cues of, when someone is suffering from some type of memory decline. And our program, the Memory and Aging Program, is also focusing on developing treatment or prevention strategy for people who are experiencing the earliest sign of memory change. And with that, I will be happy to take some question and then, have discuss it further with both of you, Victoria and Pablo.
Great, thank you very much. I do have a question. When I was a medical student, we evaluated a patient that had probably Alzheimer's. This was 40 years ago. And I was shocked by the difference between the short-term and the long-term memory. And we went through an exercise with this patient where, she could tell us her phone number from 40 years ago, but she couldn't tell us, not even a word that we just had told her just a minute ago, 5 minutes ago. How is it that short-term memory and long-term memory is so different?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually something that I hear a lot of time when I'm working with my patients as well. And, one thing that you can think of is, memory is like first in, last out. So earlier memory that, things that happened years ago, after all this year, it actually enter your long-term memory. It is in a safe place and, is not as easy to lose as short-term memory, things that you just learn. And another thing of thinking of it is also, you can think of what part of the brain is responsible for learning new information. It's the hippocampi or hippocampus is a structure that is deep inside our temporal lobe, deep inside our brain. And they are important for us to learn new information and form new memory. So when you're telling someone something right now and want them to form that new memory, they rely on that hippocampus to help to turn it into long-term memory. And if someone is having dementia, they actually, the first place that start to have problems is the temporal lobe, the hippocampus. That structure is starting to accumulate a protein fragment that we call amyloid plaques. And the volume of that structure shrink. So they have less ability to form new memories. And that's when you see that there are problems with short-term memory. They cannot learn new things. But the long-term memory is actually already in other part of the brain and is not affected until later stage of the disease. So they may have no problem telling you about what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but they couldn't learn new things that happened just now.
And I will add, because learning and memory is my area actually at a more molecular level. But part of the reason that memories that are older are able to be kept is because every time you recall a memory, every time you retrieve, like Dr. Lee was saying, you strengthen it, right? And so the number of cells in your brain that are supporting this memory increases. And so the longer that memory is, and the more you've accessed it throughout your life, the more chance you have of preserving that memory, even if a couple of cells die that are involved in the engram, so to speak, of that particular memory.
Exactly. Thank you, Victoria. Absolutely.
We have some questions from the audience.
There's one question that I love. Are there any dietary supplements proven to slow memory loss?
Yeah, so that's actually something that everyone wants, right? You want to have a pill that you can take and then it will solve all the problems, right? So as with, all the supplement research, they are not medications. So it doesn't go through as much of, scientific testing to see how effective they are. And earlier there have been a lot of research that looks at fish oil and see how that may be helpful in, with memory. And then the support is actually not very strong after a more vigorous, study. But, nowadays there are more research that focus on different types of diet. So not necessarily supplements, but the type of diet. Like people who are following a more Mediterranean style diet, they may have a less likely to have memory decline as they get older. We don't completely understand all the mechanism yet, but we think that it actually has a lot to do with heart health. Whatever diet is good for your heart is actually good for your brain. As you can imagine, if your heart is working right, it pumped blood and that brings oxygen and nutrients to your brain and preserve your brain function. So that may be one possibility, one way that you may help to preserve your memory or brain function is by following a healthy diet.
So no supplements. There are a lot of questions about specific types of supplements, which we won't name them all, but as Dr. Lee said, in general, having a steady diet and a healthy diet is probably the best way to slow cognitive decline.
Absolutely.
How about exercise?
Absolutely. Exercise is excellent for your brain as well. Exercise is good for your heart health. That will be helpful for your brain health as well. As one of the trials that our center is right now running is called a US Pointer study. It's actually a name that we gave for a multi-domain intervention trial that focus on changing someone's exercise routine, their nutrients, their diet habit. They will be provided with some cognitive training. They will be provided regular advice on how to maintain their heart and health. And that intervention was adapted from a Finland trial. It's called Finger trial. We call it Pointer here in US, but it's actually a 2-year trial that helped and found that, after following a routine for exercise, brain training, and healthy diet, people actually have a slower decline of their cognitive ability over 2 years. And those people who join the study are people who are high risk. They have a lot of vascular problems like hypertension, diabetes, and other things. And we're replicating that here in Rhode Island as well. In US, we're one of the 5 sites running this study. And we are trying to figure out if that's actually helpful in US as well. So it's helpful in Finland, but does it work in US? And we're in the process of doing it. But in general, exercise definitely will be good. And it will be physical exercise, but also cognitive exercise, something that keep your brain active, learning something new, socializing, those are all good for memory as well.
And I know that you guys at Butler have been doing a lot of studies looking at people before they develop symptoms, trying to identify changes in the brain, physical changes, in addition to symptomatic changes that could predict, the risk of someone developing Alzheimer's. Could you tell us a little bit about that research? Because I found it so interesting when I heard it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. We are the field is absolutely shifting to focus on prevention and finding people who we call in the prodromal stage. And that's actually, what does it mean? It means that someone is the person is already showing some changes in their brain, but they are not showing symptoms yet. So how do we find that out? So historically, Alzheimer's disease, the most common type of dementia, can only be diagnosed after someone died, based on autopsy, to look at the brain tissues to see if there's any amyloid plaque. But now there are new technology to allow us to examine the brain when the person is still living. And one specific types of brain scan is called amyloid PET scan. PET scan is kind of like your CT scan, something that you will do, in an emergency room. But this type of PET scan, we use a specific types of tracer that will bind to amyloid plaques. So it will travel to your brain, we will inject that, and then it travel to your brain. And when we take pictures of your brain, we will see the amyloid light up. So we can estimate how much amyloid is in someone's brain. And that can tell, the higher the amyloid level in the brain, the higher risk you may have in developing Alzheimer's or memory problems in the future. And that enable us to identify people who are showing some changes in the brain, the amyloid plaques accumulation. But when we test them, as neuropsychologists, when we test them, they are still having normal memory. And that kind of discrepancy gives us an window of opportunity to start prevention and start intervene earlier. And we are, in the middle of doing that kind of research. The PET scan is more intrusive. You need to do, some people doesn't like to be imaged, they have to stay in the room for half an hour, and you need to inject something into them. So we're trying to develop, new blood tests that is less invasive. We are developing digital cognitive testing that they can do on their phone, and trying different ways to help us to predict who is going to have a positive amyloid PET scan, and that will reduce the number of people needed to do that kind of invasive testing.
Great.
So I kind of wanted to go back to brain health, because in looking through the questions, there are a lot of them. I won't say them all specifically, but they all tend to be around health, right? What can we do to improve the health people, who were in early stages of dementia, or even who are in our younger years? So I think maybe that we kind of touched upon it already, right? We said exercise, we said diet. One thing I think we can add is our sleeping, and then also sociality, which in times of COVID has become quite difficult. So I wonder, Dr. Lee, if you have any insight as to how the lack of social interactions has been affecting people with early stages of dementia.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, especially over the last year. With patients that I'm seeing, a lot of patients was telling me that, family member coming in with their mom or dad who is experiencing memory decline, they have been saying that this is a particularly tough year because, usually my mom will, have some, girls' night out, or, going shopping with their girlfriends at least, once a week. My dad will go to the library and have coffee with his pals, and, that actually keep them going and actually keep them active. But without those, they seem to be, more decline. It seems like their memory are getting worse. And the reason being, as I said, physical activity is important, but cognitive activity is important as well. And socializing actually require a lot of your attention and brain power, right? You need to be able to focus on someone. You need to be able to process what the person is talking about. You need to be able to respond, and and without those, people tend to feel like they're declining in a more rapid pace. Another important piece is because socializing is very important for our mood. Without a lot of social interaction, if we're staying home a lot, I'm sure that all of you have experienced some of those moments where you feel really bored, you feel like there's nothing to looking forward to, and those affect our mood. When our mood is down, our memory efficiency also go down. We know that people who have depression, their memory problem can actually mimic dementia. We call it pseudo dementia. So I think that the lack of socialization definitely can take a toll on memory, especially for people who are experiencing some early signs of dementia. And so the key is, for family member to support them is to try to plan out some activity for them, make phone calls, try to visit in a social distant way. And hopefully, with everyone taking the vaccine, we can, resume some of the activities soon.
Yeah, definitely. And, I will add to that because, again, from the molecular perspective, I study learning and memory too, is that, sometimes we say that sleep is good for you, that exercise is good for you. And we kind of like, yeah, it's good for us. But it turns out that for all species, it is good for us. So even in rodent studies, if you put a rodent and house them by themselves, or even with only one other rodent, rodents are very, very sociable creatures. And then you take another group and you house them with 10 other rodents, and then you put them you give them a task, a cognitive task, and it turns out that the ones who were raised socially, or the ones who had more exercise, or the ones who had the healthier diet, or the ones who were allowed to sleep, will actually perform better on cognitive tests later in life, and it may even be protective of cognitive decline. So, if we see this even in the animal kingdom, we can be sure that they are biological mechanisms that are at play in our own health, definitely.
Absolutely, those recommendations all have scientific basis. It's not just that, okay, so you do that, and right?
Yeah, exactly. So I have some questions here. One from a middle schooler. If someone in the family has memory loss, is there a higher risk for other people in the family to have memory loss too?
That's a great question. So we know that memory loss or Alzheimer's disease have genetic components to it. There are one specific type of Alzheimer's disease that is early onset, usually early to the point where the person may have an onset of memory loss in their 30s or 40s. Those types of families actually inherit a gene that is what we call dominantly expressive. So if those family members inherit the gene, they know that they're going to start to have dementia, around the same age as their family do. But that's a very rare type of Alzheimer's disease. It only affects about 1 or 2% of people who have dementia. For the rest of the, more common kind of dementia, the way it linked with genetic is not as one-to-one. There are certain genes that we know are risk gene. So for someone who, their grandparents had dementia, they may have a little higher risk of developing dementia, but it doesn't mean that they will definitely develop dementia. For example, for myself, my grandparents on my mother's side, both grandmother and father, they have dementia. And on my father's side, there's one grandparent, my grandfather, who had dementia. I know that I'm at risk, but I don't know for sure if I'm going to develop the disease. So it's higher, but not absolute. And there's also some genes that we know are related to Alzheimer's. One of them is called the apolipoprotein E, ApoE gene. We know that a particular kind of the ApoE gene, the E4 type, is associated with higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. So anyone who is a carrier of that E4 gene, they may have a higher risk. But even if the person have 1 copy or 2 copy of the E4 genes, it's just saying that they are having a relatively higher risk. So let's say if the general population, they have about 15% chance of getting dementia. people who have one copy of the E4 gene, they may have 25% chance. If the person have two copies of the E4 genes, they may be increased to 40, 50% chance of developing Alzheimer's disease in their lifetime, but it's still not 100%. So to capture that, definitely with family history, it increases your risk, but it's not absolute. There are still many other factors that are changeable that you can work on, like good sleep, exercise, and good diet that can help mitigate those risks.
We have another question. She says, memory loss issue happen often in Asian people, Hong Kong, Singapore, when compared to US people.
So the question is it more common or less common?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a great question. That's touch on the one of the piece that I'm very interested in is there any racial ethnic difference in terms of memory loss, and I think cultural beliefs also play into that as well. So based on what I know, based on research, Asian countries like Chinese, Hong Kong, Singapore, or other people of Asian descent, there is a higher risk for them to develop strokes because of the cardiovascular risk. And stroke can cause dementia as well, and it can cause memory loss. So it's more often that you see people of Asian descent to have stroke-related dementia rather than Alzheimer's, compared to people who have who are white or who are Black, African American. And are they more likely to experience memory loss? That's actually a complicated question, because in order to understand whether those people are having more memory problems, you need to be able to find a way for people to report it. And what we found is that some cultural beliefs about aging actually may reduce the likelihood that someone say that I'm having memory problems. So let's say my grandma may say that, okay, I'm not remembering things as well. And my mother say, okay, yep, so this is expected. Your grandmother is getting older, that's acceptable, and I'm helping her. So it's not a problem. Versus, someone from a different culture who are more used to, knowing more about dementia and Alzheimer's, they may think that, okay, so this memory loss is not right. I should go see a doctor. So that may be one of the reasons why there is a less percentage of report of memory problems in Asian countries versus people, in the US. But that may be a cultural difference rather than a biological difference.
Right. Are we at time?
We are at time, yes. So I'd like to thank Dr. Lee for her presentation today. We have committed to memory, and we will never forget it.
Lemon, tiger, jacket.
Oh, there you go. Very
great
good.
Job. 100%.
Very good. I had already forgotten. I had already forgotten. So in closing, I hope you have enjoyed today's presentations. We've learned a lot about the importance of sleep in our daily lives, and specifically in the developing brain of children. You've heard firsthand of the challenges facing migraine sufferers, and you also leave with greater understanding regarding memory and the different portions that can be affected normally and abnormally. I think if you like today's presentation, please tell your friends. We have lots of more surprises for you during this very brainy week. It's been my pleasure to join you. And now for some parting words from the brain of this outfit, Dr.
Brain,
Victoria.
I like that.
Victoria.
Thank you, Paula. So on behalf of Brain Week Committee, we'd like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Brain Talk. And like Paula said, please join us again tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about mindfulness, exercise, specifically language, and also hear a personal story from a neuroscience graduate student who had a brain tumor and recovered from the removal of that brain tumor. The Zoom invitation for today is the one that works for tomorrow and for Wednesday as well. And we encourage you to register for Brainy Acts, a night of virtual theater, which starts Thursday at 7:30, and Mindfulness in Practice, which is a panel that starts Friday at 4. And finally, we invite you to look at our website and see the face masks that we are selling. They are brain themed. They have neurons and brains. So get yours before they go out. See you tomorrow, and happy Brain Week, everybody.
Bye-bye.